Good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon, whenever you're watching this. I don't have a whole lot planned for this episode, just thought I would talk a little bit about Esther. So Esther is an interesting book in the Bible, and a lot of people have even debated whether or not it belongs. I personally like its inclusion, but the reason why there's a debate is because God is never directly mentioned. Like, it never shows us God specifically working. Now, it does show something called the providence of God, which is just God's will working in the background, orchestrating everything to his perfect purpose. So if you don't know about Esther, it's a good, I think it's a good narrative one. It works good for Bible school, for Sunday school lessons. It's just a good Bible lesson to use for especially kids, but I think there's also something important for us older ones. And I'll get to that here in a second. But the story of Esther, so the Israelites are in captivity in the Medo-Persian Empire. And the king of this particular region is a man by the name of Ahasuerus. And he had just recently divorced the woman who was his queen. So he sends a decree out to all of the people, saying that he's going to collect all of the eligible women and bring them before him, and he will choose a new queen from them. And one of the young women who he gets is a girl by the name of Esther. So Esther's brought before the king, and ultimately she's decided to be the queen. He chooses her. And God has blessed her with a good position, and it's going pretty well for her so far. And as well as the king and Esther, we also have two more figures, the king's right-hand advisor, Haman, and the Mordecai's cousin and the king's guard, Mordecai. So what Mordecai, being the king's guard, he hears a plot to assassinate the king, and he brings this to light. He tells people about this, and the king promptly hears of it and has the men executed. And later on, it's brought to Mordecai's brought before the king, and he's celebrated. He's honored with that. But we also have the king's right-hand man. Him and Mordecai do not get along well at all, because Haman demands a certain level of respect that he wants Mordecai to bow to him because of his high rank and office, but Mordecai maintains that he will only bow to God, and this burns Haman up. So he devises this plot. So he goes into the king and he tells him of this secret people group within his kingdom, and what he means is the Jews, but he doesn't tell the king that it's the Jews he's referring to. He just says there is this people group who doesn't worship you, and I think that's a rebellious thing to do. We can't have them be a part of our kingdom if they're not willing to only submit to you and worship you as God. So the king's like, yeah, I mean, of course, they sound like rebels. I'll give you whatever you need at all, Haman, to get rid of this people. Thanks for talking about it with me. So Haman uses this decree, and he starts persecuting the Israelites. He sends people out to round them up, and he even has several gallows built, which are the platforms that people were hung on, because he's going to have a mass execution of the Jewish people. And Mordecai, he hears about this, and he is distraught. So the only thing that he can think to do is to bring this to Esther, his cousin. So he's at the gate, and they're sending this messenger back and forth, and he's telling her of the situation. He's like, look, Esther, they're going to come for us all, and don't think just because you're the queen you're going to be safe. If this is carried to fruition, we will all lose our lives. And one of the key takeaway verses from the book of Esther is what I'm about to read. It's chapter 4, verse. Let's start with verse 13, and I'll put these up on the screen in post. Then Mordecai told them, and I'm reading from the ESV version. I may have the KJV or some other, maybe NKJV on the teleprompter, but just it'll get the point across. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come into the kingdom for such a time as this?" that last little bit there, I think, is real important. We're going to come back to that after I finish the story. So Esther realizes that Mordecai's right, and she asks the king and Haman to come to a banquet where she cooks for them. So she does. But before she has to ask them, the queen is not allowed to enter into the presence of the king unannounced. But if she does enter in unannounced, and he will like have a scepter, and he will either point it towards her if he gives her the floor to speak, or if he doesn't, she will be punished. I believe the punishment was execution, but I'm not entirely sure on that fact. Anyway, she would be punished if she did not gain the favor of the king. So this is a big deal for her to even approach him to ask him this, because she's not been summoned or seen him in days, but she knows that she needs to act quickly to save her people. So she goes into the king, very, very brave thing to do, and he does point the scepter to her and says, "Hey, whatever you need, I got you." This is the Jonah Humphrey paraphrase. And she invites him and Haman to come to a banquet that she's prepared for them. And so they do. And she had initially planned on telling him of Haman's plot here, but for some reason maybe they were too drunk, maybe she didn't think it was the right time to tell him. But what she does at the banquet, she says that, okay, I'm going to invite you to another banquet to come to, and that's where I will reveal to you my purpose in doing this. So the king's like, oh yeah, free food, of course. I mean, yeah, you cook great, I guess. I'll go and to whatever banquet. Haman will come too. So they go to the second banquet, and Esther tells everything. And the king is furious, and he has Haman executed. Because he's furious not just because it's someone coming up against his queen, but if you remember what I, like earlier when I said it, Mordecai had also just saved his life and had gained a fair amount of honor for this. So like the person who saved his life and the queen were in the crosshairs of Haman. This enraged the king, and he had Haman hung on the gallows that he had prepared for the Jewish people. And the law of the Medo-Persians could not be undone very easily. So once he signed into law that the Jews could be persecuted, that was pretty much it. But he did sign another law that said the Jews could fight back. So Esther's people were saved through this. And there's a really funny VeggieTales clip that I'm probably going to put into this of Haman if you know the Esther VeggieTales, just play the clip. This is what it looks like when Haman goes to get executed.
You had me banish the man who saved my life and my own queen? For your punishment, Haman, you ought to be sent to the island of perpetual tickling along with anyone else who dares scheme against my queen and her family.
So Haman got what was coming to him.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's loose interpretation of what happened. But the important takeaway, I believe, from the entire book of Esther is that last bit of verse 14 in chapter 4. And who knows whether you have not come into the kingdom for such a time as this? So I'm a very nostalgic person, especially for decades that I did not take part in. I love 80s rock. I love the classic music of like 60s, 70s. I love to hear my grandparents and my parents, talk about how it was when they were kids. Kids could just play outside forever without worrying about getting kidnapped and stuff. So I'm a very old soul. They've told me that's what that's called. And all the time, when I was growing up, I would wish that I would be born in another generation. I'm like, why couldn't I have, experienced the better childhood, at least that I thought. I think I have a great childhood now, but at the time I would wish that I could experience the better childhood of my parents, or, go back and see some of the cooler parts of history instead of, the kind of mundane age that we're in now, where it just seems like you turn on the news and all the bad stuff's happening. I mean, how many people just look at the news and get a big old smile on their face? I don't think so. It's, it's a sign of the times. Bad stuff is going on now. But reading this story, the biggest takeaway that I always have is that God doesn't do accidents. I just let that marinate for a second. God doesn't do accidents. So me saying that I was born in the wrong generation, well, no, I'm not. I don't have this verse pulled up. I might, again, fix lots of things in post. But something that God said to, I believe, the prophet Jeremiah was that in your mother's womb I knew you. And he was referring, like, he said that he had a purpose for Jeremiah even that far back. So, like, Jeremiah's conception and his birth was not an accident. He was called, he was made for a purpose. And now granted, I'm no Jeremiah. I'm not, some great prophet who's going to bring condemnation onto Israel and hopefully lead them back. But I don't believe that would be put in there if that wasn't also for the people of today. So I know we can look at stuff going around and wish it wasn't us having to go through this, but God didn't put us here by accident. God didn't just haphazardly say, oh, Jonah should be born in 2005 and live, however long I'm going to live. God is in control of that. God put me on here for a purpose. God put me on earth when he did for a purpose. And I'm not just saying that for me. Every one of you watching this was created with a purpose and was created for the time that you're in. Now, I don't pretend to know the fullness of why God has put me here. I have, loose ideas of what I think he wants me to do. I think I'm being used in music ministry. I think I'm starting to preach more. I think that's something that God wants me to do, but I don't pretend to know the fullness of that reason. But I do know that God has a plan for me. This is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans of good and not for evil. Different versions will translate as plans, thoughts. Regardless, it means that God knows why you're here, and it's not just haphazard. I think, in the secular world, we're led to believe that, this all happened by accident. But I'm here to tell you that God is in control. He has a plan for you. If you're not saved, I think that I don't feel like I'm wrong for saying the first step in your plan is getting saved. I would encourage anyone watching this who isn't saved to seek out God and ask him to save you, because that's honestly the greatest thing that you can do for yourself right now. But if you are saved, if you are a Christian, take heart, because God's got you. He's got you for a reason. Everything that you're going through, I think back to James 1 verse 2, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. He goes on a little bit to say that everything that you're going through right now is to refine you, to make you better, to work patience in your life, to work you into the man or woman of God you need to be. But I think we're all called for such a time as this. Every one of us has a purpose to fulfill that God wants to use us. Not because he has to, but I think the greatest gift outside of salvation is that God lets us be a part of his plan. I just want to be a little bit of an encouragement to anyone watching this that God's got you. He knows why you're here, and if you let him, if you seek his will, I think he can use you. And yeah, I think we're all called for such a time as this. God doesn't do accidents. None of you watching this are an accident. All right, that's about all I got. So have a blessed day, week, year, all of that. God bless you. See you later.
Jonah was a prophet. Ooh, ooh. never got it.
Sad but true.
If you've been watching, you can spot it.
A doodly doo.
You did not